Hello, Steve, Ethos Preparedness. Thank you for joining. Today we are talking all things earthquake preparedness. Why do earthquakes occur? What should you do during a shaking event? How do you get through the aftermath? I've put together a little syllabus here for you to look over. If you want to jump around to the things that interest you, you can do that. If you want to watch the entire thing, I think it's going to be worth your time. Without any further ado, let's get started. Let's begin with a little bit of science. Where do earthquakes occur? Technically speaking, earthquakes can occur almost anywhere, and they do occur in very strange places that we don't associate with earthquakes. Places like Australia or the United States Midwest, even Mars has earthquakes. But when you look at 120 years of earthquake data, there's a pattern that shows that most earthquakes, actually about 80% of earthquakes and all the largest ones, occur in one specific neighborhood known as the Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire roughly surrounds the Pacific Ocean, and it's a neighborhood where a lot of tectonic plates are colliding with each other, and these collisions are what lead to earthquakes. So I'm just going to introduce you to a few of the players that you might know of. We've got the Pacific Plate, this massive piece of land that cuts through the edge of California and goes all the way west to the edge of Japan. Massive plate. To the other side, we've got the North American Plate, which encompasses all of the United States, Mexico, Canada, and goes so far east it actually cuts right through the middle of Iceland. Now, any place in the world where two large tectonic plates are coming into contact, you're likely to have a lot of earthquake activity. So as one example, if we go down to Southern California, you're going to find the meeting place of the North American Plate and the Pacific Plate, and it forms a structure known as the San Andreas Fault. Now, both the North American Plate and the Pacific Plate are in movement, and they're even moving in generally the same direction. The problem is the Pacific Plate is moving a lot faster. It's moving at about 2 inches per year relative to the North American Plate, which builds up a lot of strain that is released in earthquakes. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. What's causing these plates to move in the first place? And this is a super tricky question. It's one that scientists are always studying. The best theory is that the movement is caused by heat generated inside the Earth. One source of heat is the core of the Earth, which is burning hotter than the surface of the sun. Another source of heat is uranium that is radioactively decaying inside the mantle and releasing heat as it does. In any case, we know that the mantle is churning, and that as it does, it moves the plates that sit on top of it like food along a very slow conveyor belt at the supermarket. Though perhaps a better analogy than a conveyor belt would be a slingshot. We only began to understand what was happening with earthquakes after the 1906 8-point magnitude earthquake in San Francisco. This fence line to the north of the city tells a very fascinating story, much better than I can. Before, after. Now imagine that kind of movement in one of the largest cities in the United States. It helps you understand why earthquakes are so destructive. We're going to conclude our science lesson with a trip to the other side of the Ring of Fire, where we'll learn about a larger and very different type of earthquake. Here we find the Pacific Plate once more, and the Philippine Plate, which are subducting beneath the Eurasian Plate. What's subduction? Subduction is where one plate slides underneath another, and it takes place in the ocean. So we're going to plug our nose into the water we go. Here to the right, you see the Pacific Plate, which is moving at a rate of 2 inches per year to the northwest. So it's sliding underneath the Eurasian Plate off the coast of Japan, except it's not exactly sliding. These plates are locked, as plates tend to do. And because the Pacific Plate is pushing, the edge of Eurasia is bowing like a ruler being pushed to two ends. And you can see what's coming here. It's going to break. And when it does, it creates not only an earthquake, but it also generates a tsunami, just like the 2011 Tohoku earthquake did. That same type of event took place in 1700 off the Pacific Northwest. The largest earthquake on record in 1960 was a 9.5 subduction zone earthquake, and the largest in US history in 1962 in Alaska, also a subduction zone earthquake generating a tsunami. So today we're not only going to talk about earthquake preparedness, we're also going to talk about tsunami preparedness. All right, that's enough for science. Let's talk about safety. What do you need to do to minimize the risk of injury during an earthquake? And that work actually starts before the earthquake itself. the first place I'd turn my attention is to the furniture that surrounds you on a daily basis. Bookshelves, entertainment centers, stoves, refrigerators, things that are likely to topple over during a shaking event need to be addressed. I want to remind you as you watch this video that these are just mannequins. No one's actually getting hurt here, but I think that this shows you very succinctly how potentially dangerous the furniture that surrounds you on a daily basis can be if you haven't taken action to secure it. At the beginning of the COVID crisis, I, like so many other people, freaked out not knowing what to do inside 24 hours a day. And like many others, I put my energies towards home renovation. And my first energies were dedicated to securing furniture in my home that I had not yet readied for an earthquake. Now, before I show you how to secure furniture, I'll give you some guidelines on determining what needs to be secured. Here are the questions. Will it hurt someone if it topples over? If so, you should secure it. Will it block an exit if it topples over? Or will it block your entrance to a door that you might need to get through? If so, secure it. And will it explode? Will it catch fire, which could be the case for a gas stove or a water heater? If so, you need to secure it. I'm going to give a shout out to Safety Proof because they helped me not just with the advice, but with the equipment I used in the demonstrations that you're going to see in just a second. But regardless of what brand of seismic strap you use, make sure that the straps you buy are rated appropriately for each piece of furniture's weight and type. All right, let's secure some furniture. Welcome to my front room. You're looking at the back side of a large antique piece of furniture that we have there. And it starts by putting these big buckles on the back of that piece. This is a nice way to go about it. You see it's got this nice paint finish that I don't want to scuff up. I put those buckles where they're not visible and where they're not going to do damage to the nice finish of this piece of furniture. Now I go to the wall, I take a stud finder, which is very easy to find at any hardware store. Your neighbor might have one. Your stud finder will help you find the beams of that wall, which is the most structurally sound part, where you're going to apply these straps with a big, nice long screw, and then those straps are designed to feed right up through those buckles that are invisibly on the back of that piece, like I showed you before. Let's repeat this process one more time with a more complicated piece. This time you're looking at the back of my piano, and I wanted to put the buckles on the back, but I couldn't really find a good place for them to get purchased, so instead I put them on the side. I'll just give you a better view of how these buckles work. See on the back here, it has like an industrial sticker. You then put it in place where you want it, and then you can put screws in those 4 slots to make sure it's really nice and secured. Then, again, I find the studs in the wall, and this time I put really long straps there because I had to reach a long way around the piano to eventually feed through the buckle, put down the slider, and it will then hold that piece in place during the earthquake. Now that we've addressed the furniture and objects in your home that are most likely to cause injury, let's talk about what you do with yourself during an earthquake. I'm sure that you've seen this before. Drop, cover, hold. I want to make sure you understand why you take those 3 steps, because understanding them will make you believe in them. You drop down to the ground at the beginning of a shaking event to minimize the risk of falling. Also to minimize the temptation of running, which is strangely enough what our bodies seem to want to do during a shaking event, which leads to preventable injuries like broken elbows and twisted ankles. Drop down to the ground as soon as you detect the shaking. You take cover under something sturdy like a table or desk, because some things will topple even if you have addressed the furniture, such as the tiles in your ceiling. And you hold on because that object is shaking just like you are, and if you don't hold on, it will get away from you like an umbrella in a hurricane. Deciding how you will react before the event will make it more likely you'll take the safest action during the event itself. So what I'd encourage you to do, particularly if you have kids, is to visit room by room by room of your house and ask, what would I do if there was an earthquake while I was in this room? Here we are in my kitchen, and this is an easy spot to make the decision. My son knew to drop, cover, and hold underneath the dining room table. However, as we moved to the kitchen, my daughter found that there was no dining room table to be found, but she did know that I had secured the cabinets, so she dropped down to the ground to minimize the risk of falling, grabbed a chair to cover the back of her head and neck. She understands the idea of how to minimize the risk of injury. She's not going to fall, and the most vulnerable parts of her body, namely her abdomen and the back of her head and neck, are protected. If you have a small child, like a baby in arms, you're still gonna drop, you're still gonna cover, you're still gonna hold, but with the modification of having that child close to your chest so that he has 2 layers of protection, the table that you're beneath and your own body. If you're in a wheelchair, lock the wheels as soon as you detect the shaking to keep your wheelchair stationary. If you're able, grab a book off the bookshelf, cover the back of your head and neck to give yourself a little extra protection, and hold on with your abdomen as close to your knees as possible. That lowers your center of gravity. If you're an ambulatory person with, say, a bad back or bad knees who can't drop, cover, and hold under a table, I would take that same position as you see in the third panel to the right on a chair, as opposed to getting all the way down to the ground. As I said before, making decisions before the earthquake and practicing with your mind will help you make quicker decisions during the event. The other thing that will speed up your response is to actually practice. So, especially if you have kids, I would encourage you to do a little earthquake drill with me right now. Okay? Are you ready? Drop, cover, hold, let's go! All right, that was fun. Drop, cover, and hold on is the best technique for preventing the most common causes of earthquake injury, namely falling down or being struck by an object. However, there are many cases when this is not going to be the best or even a possible response. So let's talk about some other earthquake scenarios. What if you are in a densely urban environment? You're outside, you're surrounded by plate glass windows and brick facades. What do you do then? What if, for example, you were having coffee with these guys and there was an earthquake? I don't think dropping, covering, and holding on underneath a card table is a good bet when that table is contending with hundreds or thousands of pounds of falling mortar, brick, and other objects falling from the outside of all these surrounding buildings. In this case, I think I would move into the nearest building because there are less things that might fall on me on the inside than on the outside. I say this with trepidation because I know people inside buildings tend to sprint out of them. As you can see in this video, that's a terrible idea because these people are contending not only with falling injuries, but all the objects falling to the immediate outside. So if you do need to move into a building, do so very carefully. And what if you wake up to an earthquake, which is to say you experience an earthquake in the middle of the night in bed? It's worth mentioning one more time that you should take time to secure objects and furniture, especially in your bedroom when you're really vulnerable. Heavy objects should be at waist level or lower. Secure bookshelves, secure clothes bureaus so they don't topple over. During the earthquake itself, I'd remain in bed. I'd put myself face down. I'd grab a pillow, put it over the back of my head and neck. Then I'd just enjoy the ride for a bit. I would not get out of bed, and I would certainly not get under my bed because, for one, I'm an adult. I don't fit under my bed. And even if I did, it's gonna jump up and down for either several seconds or even several minutes depending on the earthquake. That's a recipe for injury. So remain in bed, face down, pillow over the back of your head and neck. Now, once your bed comes to a park, you're probably going to want to leave your bedroom. So you need to have some things right next to your bed to ensure that that's possible. Have a sturdy pair of shoes because glass is going to be all over the place. People cut their feet constantly after earthquakes and it's totally preventable. Sturdy pair of shoes. I'd want to have a crowbar because door frames tend to get twisted out of shape and pinch doors in place. Having a crowbar will allow you to pry that door open if necessary. I'd want to have warm clothing. Always have warm clothing under your bed in case there's a January or a November earthquake. It doesn't mean it's more likely to happen then, it's just harder in that event. So make sure you've got the clothes that you need to take care of yourself. And I'd also want to have a headlamp because I want to keep my hands free so I can tie my shoes, I can use a crowbar if needed, or do a little first aid if needed before I go outside. This is my wife and my bedroom kit, which we actually keep underneath our bed. It's got a couple pairs of shoes, crowbar, a couple fluffy sweaters, a couple of headlamps, first aid kit, ready to go all the time, there if and when we need it. What if you're driving during an earthquake? It feels like I shouldn't have to say this. You need to slow down. You need to stop the car. Evidently, people don't do this, and people get into car wrecks during earthquakes. Pull over in the safest place that you can find. If you can prevent it, avoid getting onto a bridge. If you can prevent it, avoid going under an overpass. If you can prevent it, try not to be right next to a building. But you're going to have limited choices given that time. So in all cases, I'm going to say remain in your car in park. And you can see why. This is 2010 Chile. As bad as this looks, these people at least had the cover of their cars. Had they chosen to get out, they would have been exposed to all the mortar falling on top of it. If you live in or frequently visit the coast along the Ring of Fire, you're going to want to stick with me for this. If you happen to be in the Midwest of the United States, you can probably step out. We're going to talk about tsunami preparedness. Tsunami zones do a pretty good job of letting you know that you are within reach of a tsunami that would be generated by a local fault line, one that might be just over the ocean's horizon, just out of view. Local tsunamis come in high, they come in hard, they come in fast, and they come in with very little warning. This is the tsunami generated by the 2011 Tehuku earthquake. The first thing to know about tsunamis is what causes them, and so what is the warning you're looking for. The best warning for tsunami is the earthquake itself. If you're along the coast and you just experienced a large earthquake, that's all the warning that you need that a tsunami is on the way. During the earthquake itself, you're still gonna lower your center of gravity or drop, cover, and hold depending on where you are. And then immediately, I mean immediately, once the shaking has subsided, you're going to follow the tsunami evacuation route signs up to the tsunami evacuation site. Typically, these are going to be placed 50 to 100 feet above sea level, which is above the reach of most local tsunamis. And in most cases, you're going to perform that evacuation by foot rather than in car. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, that tsunami that you're trying to escape was generated by an earthquake, and that earthquake likely destroyed the road structure, making it completely impossible to evacuate by car. Secondly, the shortest distance between two elevations is oftentimes going to be by foot. The name of the game is to get to high ground as quickly as possible. Whenever I go to the coast with my family, we run a little drill to get ready for tsunamis. It starts by locating our hotel on a local tsunami map. Are we within reach of a local tsunami at this hotel? And the answer is yes. The answer is almost always yes. Secondly, we try to find the nearest local high ground, which is demarcated in green. This isn't the evacuation site per se, it's just the nearest spot that would be above the reach of a local tsunami. Then we take a walk from our hotel up to the local high ground and we talk about it. Why would we go here? Because of a tsunami risk. When would we go there? Immediately after the shaking subsides after a large earthquake. I want to make sure that my kids know the route because it might be dark, it's likely a new community for them, and I know that they're going to be scared. Ingraining this in their brains beforehand is going to improve their performance markedly when it really counts. And now to the final chapter. Life is going to look a lot different after this earthquake, and there are a lot of things that you can start doing today to get ready for the difficult hours, days, and weeks that follow. I want to start with some of the decisions you're going to need to make immediately after the earthquake. The first decision you may need to make is whether to remain inside the building that you might have found yourself or to go outside. And it's a judgment call. Choose the less dangerous option. If you are inside and look outside and see that there's a gas main explosion or other obvious hazard, I'd advise you remain inside. However, if you see that things look clear, I'd rather go outside after the earthquake, knowing that aftershocks are going to begin as soon as 5 minutes after the initial event, and each aftershock is going to put more toll on the building that you found yourself. And it's also going to be more frightening when you're inside. If it's a major earthquake, there are very likely to be injuries. And it's very unlikely that EMTs and firefighters are going to be able to respond to all the needs in your community. So if you've got first aid kits, if you've got first aid skills, be ready to be your neighborhood's first responder. If you don't have these things, I would recommend taking a class and equipping yourself with a robust first aid kit. You'll need to take action to mitigate other potential risks in your neighborhood. Let's start by paying a visit to your gas main. Do you smell gas? Do you hear gas hissing from a pipe? Do you see that the gauges are twirling around like crazy? Those are all pretty clear signs of a gas leak that you're going to want to shut off immediately. I keep a gas shutoff tool right next to the gas main. You need to turn the gas key 1/4 turn so that it's perpendicular to the intake valve. Once it's off, it needs to remain off until a gas utility professional can safely turn it back on. And if you suspect a gas leak, no open flames, no turning on electrical equipment whatsoever inside your home. Big earthquakes are almost always followed by big fires. We saw it in 1906 with the big one in San Francisco, in 1995 with the Kobe earthquake in Japan, 1994 Northridge, California, and famously in 1989 the Marina fire after the Loma Prieta earthquake, which prompted regular civilians like you and me to put out a major fire using the hose of a marina boat that had never been used before. You probably won't be called upon for such heroics, but you may be called upon to use your own fire extinguishing equipment. If you've got a fire extinguisher, as you definitely should, make sure that it's fully charged and that you know how to use it, which consists of simply pulling a pin, squeezing the handle, and pointing the powder at the base of the flame rather than the top. If you don't have any fires in your vicinity, that's a great thing. Then take that fire extinguisher after the earthquake and put it on your front sidewalk or in the hallway of your apartment. That way you can share this equipment with your neighbors before they share their fires with you. Last is a very simple move. If you're okay, let people know it by putting a sign on your front door. And this will likely encourage your neighbors to start doing the same. I like this move because I want to know who I can team up with to go give aid to people who might need it. It also helps rescuers when they come through your neighborhood to prioritize those who have not indicated that they are okay. In summary, those first 24 hours after the earthquake should be dedicated to making sure you're in a physically safe environment during the aftershocks, tending to first aid injuries, mitigating other possible hazards such as gas leaks and fires, and gain a feel for how your neighborhood's doing. From here forward, we're going to talk about how to deal with very serious utility and service disruptions that are almost certain to occur after a big earthquake. Let's start with the most serious disruptions that you need to anticipate. Water and sewage lines are not typically made to be earthquake resistant. The disruption of tap water and flushing toilets is certain to cramp your style, so here's what you're going to do about it. Let's start with the drinking water. The general rule is to have 1 gallon of water per person per day after the earthquake. Half of that water is for drinking, and the other half is for cooking, cleaning, and just general purposes. So the variables here are how many people are in your home and how many days are you getting ready for. I'm going to suggest that you get ready for at least 7 days and more appropriately 14 days of drinking water after the earthquake. So my recommendation is to have 14 gallons of water per person in your home. There are lots of good ways to go about building this water supply. If you want to begin right now and to do it for free, then identify some empty 2-liter soda bottles, wash them out with water and soap, disinfect them, fill them up with tap water, cap them off, put them into a cool, dark place, and change that water out every 6 months to a year. The downside of this method is it's going to take up a lot of room. So if you're getting 14 gallons per person, this is going to be a lot of 2-liter bottles. A more space-efficient way to go about it would be to identify some emergency water containers, which are almost always BPA-free blue plastic. The ones that I've identified hold 7 gallons per container. So I've got 2 per person in my home, 2 for the dog. I've got 2 in the car as well. Another 2 for my neighbors. I've got a lot of water. But I'll never say that I've got too much water in a time after an earthquake when none of the faucets are working. Let's talk about your toilets. After an earthquake, they are probably not going to flush. I'm not just making this up. Go to Christchurch, New Zealand, where in 2010, 2011, they had a pair of major earthquakes, and they did not have flushing toilets in a city of about 1 million people for 1 year, which explains why there are so many portaloos, as they call them, popping up out of the streets of Christchurch. But of course, they don't pop up out of nowhere. They need to be brought in by outside responders, and they are not going to come immediately. So that's going to leave you with some decisions to make between the earthquake and that first trip to the bathroom. And there's actually a formula for this. It's called an earthquake toilet system. It consists of 2 5-gallon buckets. One is for number 1, the other is for number 2. And yes, this is totally gross. My little dude thought it was gross too. But keeping number 1 and number 2 separate is key to an earthquake toilet system, because mixing these things is going to heighten the smell, which is unpleasant to you and very attractive to rats, which we need to keep away for a number of hygienic purposes. So let's talk a little bit more about how to properly use the number 2 bucket. You're going to need a liner for those buckets. Just a garbage bag will do. You're going to need a source of carbon. Could be sawdust, it could be shredded paper, which you will sprinkle on top every time you use the number 2 bucket. That minimizes the smell, helps to keep the rats away. And you're also going to need a place to sit, because you're going to be using this quite a bit. So if you go look up at your favorite shopping engine, earthquake toilet lid, you will find circular toilet lids for 5-gallon buckets. Or you can do the whole thing for free. Go to a Japanese restaurant, go to the back alley of it, and you're going to find a lot of discarded 5-gallon soy sauce containers. They're free for the taking. Go to a carpenter and ask them for a big bag of sawdust, and they will be happy to get it off their hands. And you can even take a pool noodle, slice it right down the middle, and voila, you have just made an earthquake toilet. Lack of running water and flushing toilets seems bad enough, but there's more. I would also expect a disruption of electricity and gas for cooking and heat. I'm not just making this up. Again, there's visual precedence for this. Northridge, California, 1994, we've got a broken gas main right next to a broken water main. Here we are in Christchurch, New Zealand. Local power outages caused as these power lines come into contact with one another. Region-wide blackout, Tokyo, Japan, 2011. It's likely to be very dark after a nighttime earthquake because of these regional blackouts. It might even be dark enough to see the Milky Way from a metropolitan center, as they reported in Northridge, California after their 4 a.m. earthquake in 1994. So here's the scenario to imagine. You are outside because you feel safer outside during all these aftershocks. You've got no electricity and you've got no gas for heat. What do you do? This is not actually an unprecedented situation. This is very, very similar to camping. I would want you to be ready to spontaneously camp, even in an urban environment. Maybe on your front lawn, maybe at the local park, maybe in a parked car, but camping is essentially the idea here. And the idea of camping is to get by without utilities. Tents, sleeping bags, tarps, canopies, things to keep yourself warm, such as ponchos and emergency blankets and wool blankets. You probably have a pretty good idea already of how to protect yourself from the elements. If you are a camper or a fisher or a hunter, take all that equipment you use for those activities and make it accessible, put it with your kit. It's going to come in very handy after a major event. I'll also point out that some of these camping implements, such as a canopy, can be used not just for shelter, but also for water catchment to help us with some of the water disruption we're likely to face after an earthquake. Another great camping implement is a life straw. It's a portable water filtration system that's popular with campers. It helps make river water safe to drink. That same life straw might be put to use making puddles on your sidewalk safe to drink. Just make sure to read the instructions so that you use it correctly and safely. As far as cooking without gas, the camping stove that you likely have if you're a camper is a great option. If you're not a camper, then turn to the barbecues. They're in your backyard or within your neighborhood. Provided that they're not tied into the gas infrastructure, that they're just charcoal or propane fed, then they're going to be a great way to get cooking done. And also a great way to build community because you're all trying to figure out how to feed yourself and how to get through the things in your freezer before they spoil. Let me point out that you want to always go into winter with propane and charcoal. I know you don't think you're going to cook in December. You just might cook in December. Always be ready. When night falls, as I warned you before, it is likely to be penetratingly dark. And we're not used to dark. Psychologically, we don't have a lot of experience with absolute dark. So having a way to light our environment is going to feel important. If there are no gas leaks in your neighborhood, and if it's not wildfire season, you might actually consider building a fire on your front lawn or in the local park. When I trim the apple tree, we keep the limbs for this very purpose. But again, do so very, very carefully. And if you're not sure if you should, it means that you shouldn't. Other sources of light are, of course, simple flashlights and lanterns, which I know you have. But for this event, I would encourage you to invest in a solar power or crank power source of light because batteries are going to be nearly impossible to replace once they run out, and you're going to be using these light sources a lot. And once the sun comes back up, there's still work to do. You've still got a household to run. Take a look at all the appliances that you used to wash your clothes or wash the dishes or to entertain yourself or to open that tuna can, and start asking yourself, is there something that I could get my hands on that would allow me to do this task without gas or electricity? And once again, anyone who camps knows the answer to these questions. Let's take a moment to consider how to get ready outside of your home, because you might not be at home during an earthquake. What if you're in your car? What if you're riding your bike someplace? What if you're taking the bus from this place to that place? What if you're between home and work? There are a few things that I like to always have with me so that I can go from that unknown place and walk home with all the things that I need. It's a simple little kit to put together. It consists of a little bit of food, a bit of water, medication, poncho, emergency blanket, life straw. It's not meant to last you for days. It's meant to last you at least for that walk. Now, I don't think you're going to be driving around after an earthquake based on all the damage to the roads. Any place that you go, you're likely going to have to go on foot. And the place that people very often choose to go at the onset of a disaster is to the grocery store, so that they can gather up all the things they wish they had bought just before the disaster. I want to bring up a couple of obvious things that will give you pause before you consider doing this. Firstly, I'm betting that most of your transactions today take place with credit cards and debit cards, which rely on electricity and internet, which will be out after this. Any transactions that you hope to conduct immediately after an earthquake will have to be done in cash. But even if you had a handful of cash, I wouldn't go to the local grocery store based on what happened at that grocery store during the earthquake. You've got merchandise in the aisles, you've got aftershocks, which are a further risk. I'm betting that the cashiers have run home, so there's not an honest way to buy things, even if you did have cash. I think it's going to be kind of a sketchy environment. I think that the first place that I would look for food after an earthquake, and only if I felt it was safe, would be back in my own home, which has been radically remodeled in a way that I find completely distasteful. If you are able to get back into your home, here are the foods that I would eat, and here's the order that I would eat them. I would start out with refrigerated foods. If I can get back into my refrigerator within 4 hours, some of those foods might still be good. Then frozen foods, which might last up to 48 hours without electricity. Once I'd gone through those, I would move on to non-refrigerated perishable foods, things like breads and bananas. And then only once I'd gotten through all the most perishable foods, I'd move on to the shelf-stable foods, the pastas and the rices. On the topic of shelf-stable foods, I'll point out that today there was not an earthquake at your local grocery store, and you can go there to start stocking up on the shelf-stable foods that you might need after a big event like this. I would advise stocking up on foods that have at least a 10-year shelf life, something that is calorie-rich, high in protein, high in carbohydrates, and also something that's fairly portable, because you just might be evacuating with this food. And if it's all canned food, for example, that's a really heavy burden to take from point A to point B. And don't forget about your pets. Dogs and cats need food and water as well. What I do for our dog is I have one sack of dog food that we just never touch. That's her earthquake supply. And there are other things that you're going to want after the earthquake that you can get at the grocery store today. You still need toilet paper. You still want the people in your life to wear deodorant and brush their teeth. You're very much going to need tampons. Anything that you use on a weekly basis that can run out is something that you're going to want to stock up on before a major event. The other place people oftentimes need to go after an earthquake is the local hospital. I would expect your local medical center to be understaffed, overtaxed, and in part incapacitated by the earthquake.
What we have here behind me is the emergency room section of the hospital. It's out here in the parking lot. Take a look. We have a number of people waiting for treatment here. Many of them say they were injured during the earthquake. Things fell on them. They were cut walking on glass, a number of broken bones, and that type of thing.
Seeing the state of care in that hospital might encourage you once more to do everything that you can to minimize injury from the earthquake itself. But I hope you also noted some of the injuries that reporter noted. Broken bones, cut feet from glass. Many of the injuries that people are showing up for are ones that can be treated with basic first aid training. So I'll encourage you once more, have a robust first aid kit and get yourself properly trained. Also on the health front, I want to note that your local pharmacy, just like many other stores, is not going to be able to open and refill prescriptions immediately after an earthquake. I would build up at least a 30-day medication supply, especially if it's an important medication to your health. Every medication does have an expiration date, so make note of it so you can make sure that you're consuming the medications in your emergency kit before they expire, and then replace them with new prescriptions as they come in. It's also a good idea to peel the label off an empty prescription bottle and to put that label in your kit. That way, if you have to evacuate and deal with a doctor who is not your primary care provider, you can show them what medication you're taking, in what dosage. That's going to help that doctor to refill the prescription. Lastly, you should know that in the days following an earthquake, the air quality is likely to be terrible. There will be particulates in the air, smoke, chemical leaks even. Having an N95 or a P100 mask will help protect your lungs. I'd also have a set of goggles. We're going to wrap things up with a note on communication. After a big earthquake, you're going to be desperate to communicate with friends and family. But your smartphone is not going to be able to place calls. Cell towers might be damaged, there's probably not electricity. Almost certainly, everyone is trying to make calls at the same time. Our communications infrastructure is just not built for that kind of traffic, especially after a big event. However, we did learn from the 2010 earthquake that struck Haiti that texting tends to be fairly resilient, provided that you are texting people outside the earthquake zone. In Haiti, after the earthquake, they couldn't text inside of Haiti, but people were successfully sending texts to friends in Paris and to family in Miami. So what do you do with that information? I would encourage you to choose a central point of contact who is completely outside of your earthquake zone. We chose a central point of contact 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C. Our central point of contact maintains a list of all the friends and family that I'm concerned about, and those same friends and family have instructions from me to text our friend in Washington, D.C. with key information immediately after the earthquake. They are to text her who they are, where are they, how are they, who is with them, and what are their plans? What are they going to do next? And our central point of contact is compiling all of these texts from my network and is sending out one mega text to the entire group. It only takes one moment of connectivity to catch a text in your phone. And when I catch that text, I have an update on everyone that I'm concerned about. I know I dropped a ton of information on you today, and I hope I didn't overwhelm you. I want to encourage you to start and just do one thing that feels doable now. If you need further guidance, you can look to your local emergency management for the guides and practices that they recommend. Redfora also has a number of guides to help you with the very practical steps of getting ready, building kits, and making plans with your family. I'm gonna let you get to it. Go forth, be well, and get prepared.